For thousands of years, civilization has been a destructive force, both ecologically and socially. In the midst of the sixth extinction, the future of humanity and our other than human kin hangs by a thread. At this pivotal moment in time, we must reach back into the depths of the human story and uncover our mistakes. There is still time to reconnect with what we have lost, to restore our broken relationship to the land where we dwell, and to remember the human place in the wild. Hello, and welcome to the Rewilding podcast. I'm your host, Peter Michael Bauer. This podcast is produced and made possible from supporters on Patreon. Thank you. If the Rewilding podcast inspires you, gives you hope, or makes you think, please subscribe, share it on social media, and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. On this episode, I'm once again chatting with my friend and colleague, Woniya Thibeault. This episode contains spoilers for the television series Alone, of which Woniya has been a contestant on twice now. If you haven't watched Alone Season 6 or Alone Frozen, I recommend doing so before listening. Woniya came in second place on Alone Season 6, and more recently won $500,000 when she came in first place on Alone Frozen. Both times, she brought a rewilding, relational perspective to her experience and to the public. However, when creating a show, there's always a lot that ends up being edited out. To increase awareness for her journey and to teach the public more lessons that didn't make it onto the show, Woniya wrote a book titled Never Alone about her experiences on season 6 of the show. Woniya is someone who continues to inspire me through her dedication and passion for living in a way that is more connected to our ecologies and for sharing her journey with the world. In this conversation, we talk about her new book, her experiences, survival challenges, and much more. Welcome back to the Rewilding podcast. I think you're the first person I've had back. Almost wow. 50 podcasts. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. It was one of my favorites, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So last time we talked, it was like, pandemic was going on. We kind of had some conversations around that. You had only been on Alone once now. And then the last time we actually talked in person, you couldn't tell me, or not in person, but on the phone, you couldn't tell me that you had won. So there was sort of some fun conversation going on there. But yeah, you spoiler alerts, you won your second round on Alone. And you're the first woman to win Alone. Pretty exciting. Yeah, how are you feeling about all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. It's super thrilling. It's incredibly validating and empowering. And it's also an interesting place to hold because I don't like it being a big deal that a woman did this thing.
Totally.
As if it is a big deal and women aren't perfectly capable of doing it. And I feel like there's this, the show kind of sets it up. It's a numbers game where women are less likely to win because they only ever cast max 3 in any season. So I'm like, yes, it's awesome. It's great. I'm super proud to be the first woman to win. Let's talk about why it shouldn't be unusual for a woman to do well at a challenge like this.
Yeah.
And that like focusing on that overly kind of draws emphasis away from the fact that like so many amazing women have done it and we got a 30% chance at winning on an average season versus a 70% chance because there's so many more men on it.
Totally. Yeah, and it was cool. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Alone. I hated reality shows for a long time. I started watching it because you were on it the first time. And then I was like, okay,
that's the only way I saw it too, because Nicole and Randy and Jose were on it. Yeah,
totally. And I remember I actually watched a few seasons with Nicole, but I wasn't captivated by it back then. I think the overall the number of people that they're getting and the storytelling that they're doing is way better than the first few seasons. And okay. So, I was like crying in your season and crying the next season and crying the season after that. Like, I did not want what was his name? Roland or whatever from I think it was season 7. I didn't really want him to win initially. And then by the end of it, I was just like, deserved it, like he stabbed a muskox to death or whatever. Like, all right, man, like you deserved it. But it's been so I feel like it's a really cool show. And in one of the seasons, I can't remember which one, this guy was talking about how it's kind of like the Olympics for the ancestral skills or primitive skills movement. And I really was like, that's an interesting way of like, kind of perceiving it as this thing of like, you dedicate your life to this and then you put yourself into it, and what's the payoff going to be? And I'm really curious to hear your perspective on like this sort of the payoffs of putting yourself through those situations. And like, I mean, has it been worth it, like overall the whole experience? I mean, that obviously I'm sure in some ways yes. What are the like pros and cons, I think, of going through this whole thing?
Yeah, great question. I think that was Amos on season 7 who referred to
Mm-hmm.
it as the Olympics, and it's interesting because Amos was on the Frozen season as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will say though that I would say I feel like it's an accurate thing to say, but more towards like survival as opposed to ancestral skills, because a lot of seasons don't have any ancestral skills people on it, or if they do, it's usually like maybe one, maybe two people who are interested in it. But yeah, it's absolutely a really intense, incredible challenge. And I think those of us who are into the ancestral skills and the more primitive technologies, who are going about it from more of a lifestyle choice as opposed to a survival challenge, it's really, we're very aware that the situations that they put us in are not representative of what it would be to actually live wild on a piece of land
Sure.
that you had a relationship with, that you
Mm-hmm.
had been there for
Mm-hmm.
seasons preparing for,
Mm-hmm.
that you had as part of your community's deep ancestral wisdom passed on through the generations, and that you got to do with other people, because
Mm-hmm.
no humans were living long term in the wild outside of context of a community, or if they were, it was often a punishment, right?
Right.
Banishment was like
Totally.
a death sentence. So that said, I don't like feeding the notion that going out into the wilderness to live long term is this super extreme thing, because it's not. It's what we evolved
Mm-hmm.
for, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and wonderful thing.
Mm.
However, the ways we do it in alone are extremely challenging by design. And so in that way, I do think that it's accurate to say it's the ancestral survival Olympics, in that, dang, do they ever make it really hard to last a long time out there.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially kind of like a triathlon of survival skills or something, right? Like, you know what I mean? There's just like, you have to have certain skill sets within those frameworks too, and you have to have them as an individual. Aside from all of the like,
Totally. Well, and because it's like the weather is always terrible. It's always a place where food is really hard to come by. And then it's not just a wilderness living challenge. You are filming that. And that is a
yeah,
huge outlay
yeah,
of calories and energy.
totally.
But I want to circle back to your question, which I still haven't addressed, which was like, was it worth it? And in what ways? And I would say, I mean, 100%, there's no part of me that wishes I hadn't done it. And I have only slight negative repercussions in my life. Like my teeth got a little
Mm-hmm.
shot out there. There might be some long-term physical things that I'm not aware of yet that could come from it. And I had some pretty intense like illnesses that I probably wouldn't have gotten
Mm,
both times in the year after it. So
mm,
I'm definitely aware of the stressors on my body. That said, my time out, especially on season 6, healed a lot of long-term physical issues that I
mm,
had. Like, I
mm,
think I had some chronic joint pain
mm.
and all kinds of things that I struggled with throughout my life that were gone. And I think that that's part of it's similar to long-term fasting and then
Interesting.
autophagy, like the body's mechanisms to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it was also just the life-changing experience of, for
Mm,
the first time, getting to do this thing that
mm.
my entire adult life has been built around, and doing it really well, and recognizing that I do have some potent skills, and the mind-blowing, life-changing beauty of getting to live like a wild creature in a pristine wild landscape, and being so in tune with an environment and so deep in my animal body and the animal experience of what it is to have no cushion, no safety net. Every day is a question, and you're 100% reliant on yourself, your skills, and that environment working with you. I mean, it's by far
Mm,
the most potent thing I've ever done in
mm.
my life, both times. Both times I had things happen that were so absurdly magical and out of the realm of what you would think would be possible, in terms of the land speaking to me and showing up for me in unbelievable ways. I don't think I could have had those experiences in any other way than like a complete surrender total immersion, like truly life on the
Mm-hmm.
line. So those things would 100% be worth it, even if I didn't also happen to get a significant cash bonus from my
Yeah.
second time.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm, that cash bonus has allowed me to throw myself into my book project and have it
Mm-hmm.
done really well, really professionally, really throw myself into the publicity of it, to get it out there to reach as many people. So it's like the cash part has allowed me to give my experience to more people
Mm-hmm.
and have more people vicariously experience what it is to have that depth of connection and interdependence and what have you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's
the
awesome.
payoff is like 100 times more
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
than the few setbacks.
Totally. Yeah. Um, One thing that we talked about on the phone briefly months ago before before you were able to, tell people that you won, was that you felt it the second time was harder, like psychologically. And so yeah, I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, infinitely, so much harder. So it was really fascinating because the first time was like the most incredible, beautiful, joyful, magical thing I've ever experienced, even with the incredibly challenging parts, which not to say there weren't. There were lots of incredibly challenging parts, but I definitely went into the second time expecting it to be more similar to how it was the first time, expecting that same magic and connection and joy. And also knowing that I had been in an extreme environment the first time. I mean, just below the Arctic Circle,
Mm-hmm.
late fall. I mean, it was what felt like early fall to us, but up there, it's already kind of late fall by the end of August. Um, so I kind of felt like, oh, this is further south than that. I've got this. It shouldn't be 50 days. I was out 73 days last time. What could possibly go wrong? You know? So like I and everybody else out there had our butts handed to us. It was so hard. And then psychologically, I think it was really challenged for me in a variety of ways. So one was expectations. The first time I had no expectations, and it blew whatever thoughts I might have had out of the water in terms of how amazing it was. The second time I had big expectations, and it was so different, it didn't
Mm,
meet them.
mm,
The first time I was single, I was used to being on my own all the
mm,
time. The second
mm-hmm,
time I was in a relationship, so I definitely
mm-hmm.
had more loneliness and sense of what I was missing the second time. um but then also I think that neither I nor any of the other participants nor the show were prepared for the fact that the first time you're really naive about what you're signing up for, and the second time you absolutely know what this experience is going to do
Yeah.
to your body, how
Right.
long it's going to tank your life
Yeah.
afterwards, what
Yeah.
recovery is going to look like, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
is it worth it?
Totally.
Because I am not having any fun, and I know it's going to make my life
Yeah.
pretty intense for months and months after this experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other thing is straight up PTSD. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that any of us really recognized that we had PTSD from the first time. And like I don't in my life in general from it, but being out in the
Mm-hmm.
same
Mm-hmm.
extreme circumstances again, all of that stuff and
Mm-hmm.
everything that was crazy. I think I've never done it, but I think it's like childbirth where you like it's so hard, but then afterwards you remember, you've got this beautiful
Sure.
child. So
Right.
you forget the hard parts and you remember the beautiful parts. And I think alone is like that. And then you're out there and you're like, oh my God, this again? And
Mm-hmm.
like for
Mm-hmm.
weeks and weeks more, are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
Yeah.
So yeah, like the first time, never once thought about leaving. Zero intention of tapping out ever. The second time, and I never thought seriously about tapping out, but I had to convince myself of why I wanted to be out there every day the
Mm-hmm.
second time.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I mean, yeah, everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense because of like the other contestants or the other participants were like tapping out. Like they're just kind of and they weren't really in like a serious situation. A lot of them were just like, okay, no, I'm not gonna do this again. Like that was like half of them or whatever, like, wow, really? They're just like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good, actually.
I
I'm
know,
like, oh my
which was
God.
crazy because almost everybody out there had gone 50 days before.
Right.
And it was like,
Yeah.
and it wasn't even a,
Yeah.
down to the last one competition, like all of us could
Yeah.
win if we stayed
Yeah.
out long enough. So the
Right.
incentive was super high,
Yeah.
and yet people still dropped like
Yeah.
flies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
I like I said, I think the producers were more surprised than anybody about how things went down, and were like, dang, how are we gonna create suspense out of this outcome? You know, because
yeah,
suspense is like their calling card. It's what the show is built around. And
totally.
there was no suspense. There was weeks between most people leaving.
Right. Yeah. And how much longer were you like when was the second person to leave? Like how
She left day 38, so I was out there
okay.
another 12 days.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think, people are always asking me like, "Oh, are you going to do it?" And I'm like, "No, there's no fucking way I would ever do that show." Like, I don't have the hunting skills that are required, and I don't have. I mean, I could probably get those, but the thing that I don't think I could get is that like, um, that ability to be on your own. Like I did Boulder Outdoor Survival School's like 14-day field course, which isn't a big thing, right? And you're with a group most of the time, but they have you go and do a solo for, depending on the length of the program, 2 3 days or whatever. And on my solo, I was just like going out of my fucking mind. Like I'm just like, I can't do this. And I was able to break through it a little bit. But when the person walked up, I was expecting them to come back at like noon or something on the third day or whatever, and they showed up really early in the morning with the rest of the group, and I was like, oh my god, like I was just like laughing in this really weird way. It just felt like so odd to see people, even though it had just been 2 days, and I was like, wow, I have a lot of respect for the people who can make it that long. And one of the things that they talk about at that in that course, which I've done lots of survival skills stuff and everything, but I think one of the things that I hadn't heard before that I liked what Boston included was the order of survival skills, right? Like shelter, water, fire, food, or whatever. Different organizations have different models for that. But the rule of three, right? So you have like 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and they had 3 months without companionship. And
Oh,
I
I've
was
never heard
like,
that in the rule of threes.
yeah. And I was like, whoa. And that's like exactly essentially the length of a loan, right? Like 3 months is like the most, 90 days or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, the 100-day challenge one. There was that one too. But it's just interesting to think about like that they've now tacked that on. And I really appreciated that sort of added element
Yeah.
to it because I really feel like that's definitely a real thing for people.
Yeah, that I mean, yes, agreed, absolutely. And something that was interesting to me, especially the first time, and it started to become more true the second time as well. I was much more lonely early on the second time. I was
Mm,
never lonely the first time. And so I think that it depends how you define companionship. And I
mm,
talk about this a lot. I talk about it in my book. I talk about it in all of my teaching, that like I'm a naturalist. I grew up hiking my whole life. I went to school for ecology and biology and botany. And so to me, I'm definitely getting companionship
mm,
from the wild
mm,
elements out there. I mean, I had birds that I saw regularly, that I was having conversations with. I was talking to the plants all the time. I mean, the freaking rocks, like
mm,
that
mhm,
place is so, well, both places, but I guess now I'm thinking of the second place because I had a lot of relationship with rock. I was building with rock in Labrador.
mm,
And
mhm.
so to me, I didn't feel a lack of companionship, but that's different than human companionship. And I think that people who
Totally.
don't connect with the wild, I mean,
Mm,
basically being an animist is a
mhm,
survival
mhm,
skill,
mm,
because then you never lack for
mm,
companionship. But if
mm,
companionship means human conversation, then you're going to have a really freaking hard
mhm,
time, probably well before three
mm,
months.
mhm. Yeah, and that makes me think of Castaway, the
Right.
beach ball or whatever, the volleyball. Yeah.
Well, our friend Twig, talked to me before I went on Alone season 6. He was like, I think you should make like a cattail doll or some little creature that you can
Mm,
talk to. Like,
mm,
Wilson, that is a real thing.
yeah.
So I went in thinking I might, but then I was like, oh, I don't need that at all, because I speak to
Mm,
every tree
mm,
before I
mhm,
cut it. I speak to
mhm,
every bird that flits through camp, which is a lot.
mhm,
There are animals everywhere. There's this huge lake that's such a powerful
mm,
force and entity. So nah, I'm good. I don't
mm,
need Wilson.
mhm.
Wilson is everywhere I look.
Yeah. I mean, it might have been a good comedic effect, but
Totally.
somebody
I'm
else might
surprised
do
it
that.
hasn't
Yeah,
happened
yeah,
actually.
yeah. Me too. Maybe they've just edited it out or something. Maybe it has,
That
but
could be. And also, little side anecdote, we watched Castaway the night before launch in Labrador.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I'm curious too around the weather in the two different seasons. It seemed like the first one wasn't as bad as the second time around. Like it seems like it was just like pouring rain or something the whole time, but I don't know what.
Yeah, it was brutal the second
Mhm.
time. Like the first time it was cold, it was like it got down as low as minus 25 and with wind chill, I mean, who knows because Arctic winds are pretty real. So again, the second time they were like, yeah, the weather's real bad in Labrador and I was like, come on, like Arctic. Got
Mhm.
this. Oh no. The weather in Labrador was insane. It was so much harder. And yeah, it was because it was a wet cold. It wasn't until
Mhm.
later in the season that it got to a real cold. But interestingly, I would say the season was exactly split half and half. Like we got our first intense snow day 20, and then we didn't have snow really sticking and staying on the ground continually until day 25, and it was 50 days. So the first 25 days were wetter, and then after that it
Mm.
was all snow, but it was still
Mm.
a wet snow until the last couple of weeks. But it's misleading watching the show because so many people were gone by then. I mean,
Right.
basically it was mostly just myself and Michelle for the
Mhm.
last half of the
Mhm.
season. And and so they most of the episodes were when there were more people, so they condensed basically all of the last half almost into the last episode
Right.
because it was just
Totally.
Michelle and I,
Yeah.
and then she left, and then it was another almost 2 weeks, and they showed all that in like a minute. So you get the
Mhm.
impression that there wasn't much snow, but there was a ton of it. um it was just the last half. But yeah, the rain, which was always like sleety, it was always right at the edge of freezing. The wet rain was really challenging. And the big thing was the winds. They have what's called called a cyclonic weather system. It's literally like winds that come from every direction all the time.
God.
So it's not just weather, it's that the weather like
Right.
drives into
Yeah.
everything. Like there's
Yeah.
no dry wood, even like the center of larger trees completely saturated because like horizontal
Yeah.
rain all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
It was
Ugh.
absurd.
Oh God. It makes me think of
It's why
I
I
think
built into solid rock too.
yeah,
It's like
right.
this wind
Totally.
could blow over anything, but
Yeah.
this, 100 foot by 100 foot boulder that's actually
Mm.
actually attached to the bedrock, I think this is going to stay put.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one season, it might have been the first one, where this guy was just like under a tarp shelter on Vancouver Island and it just was like flapping around the whole time. And I just would like the idea of being in wind just for any period of time is like really annoying. But for days and days and days, like in a tarp that's like flapping around, no, never gonna happen.
Yeah, no,
um,
both seasons I had a huge emphasis on shelter. And a lot of people, I feel like it's a weird thing on Alone. A lot of people don't put a lot of energy towards their shelter, or some people, even
mhm,
people who've done well are like, "Oh yeah, food first, then shelter." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You can
mhm.
go 3 weeks without food, no problem. I know. I've basically done it, but
Yeah.
you can die in hours of exposure. And
Mhm.
this is the freaking Arctic or Labrador,
Yeah.
Canada. Like these are not
Yeah.
summer vacation. Like shelter is
Yeah.
100% your most important survival need out
Totally.
there. I mean, water is pretty key too. But yeah, like a flappy tarp, no. Like I poured myself and
Yeah.
most of the calories I brought in with me into my shelter both season. And,
Yeah.
I think it really served. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was a key part of my
Mm-hmm.
strategy.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the best parts about the show too, is the like accumulative knowledge by all of the new seasons. There's like a whole new set of like tips and because you can see who's succeeding and how they're doing it, right? And so yeah,
Yeah.
like watching you set up the shelter in this one, I was like, this is going to be awesome. Like your shelter is going to be the best. Only because I had seen a lot of the other seasons and known like what really worked well. And
Yeah, and I think that something that viewers don't recognize with the show is like the second season in the same location, you have a huge advantage. So throughout the
mhm,
shows, for sure, like the skill level and the strategies have gotten better and better every season, watching all of the cumulative seasons. But if you've watched people survive in the exact place you're going to, like, you know what game is there, you know what takes that game, you know what plants are there. I mean, it's a huge
Totally.
advantage.
Yeah.
And Labrador, this was the first season there, and the first season on the coast, the first season ever on the East Coast. So, and we launched way later than any other season has been. So there was that's why they did this. It was the All-Star Challenge, like harder than ever with seasoned people. They did what they could to make it incredibly hard, and it was. And then it kind
Yeah.
of came back to bite them because people were like, I'm out of
Out.
here. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly. But not you.
Not
You
me.
did it.
Yeah. I
You
mean, I
fucking
had
did
those thoughts
it.
too.
That's
Like,
awesome.
and it
Yeah,
showed it. Like, I had
totally.
day 6 was my hardest day, and I was like, what am I doing out here? I
Yeah.
don't want to be here. Like, I'm not leaving,
Yeah.
but I don't want to be here.
Hmm.
And that night was the night that I sprayed myself in the face with pepper spray in
Oh,
the middle of the night.
fuck.
I was like, the safety had come off because it was all this crazy low, like the winds were so intense that most of the trees grew sideways. So trying to wade through these forests was insane. So at some point, the little pin that's like the safety on my bear spray
Oh,
must have gotten
God.
pulled out, and I
Yeah.
didn't realize it. And then in the night, I was fumbling. I had to go pee or something, fumbling for my headlamp, and pressed the trigger on my bear spray in
Oof.
the dark. And it
Oof.
was like me, the hood of my sleeping bag, because I
Yeah.
would like build a nest with my parka on the ground, like my rain jacket down first to keep the moisture out, then my parka for my padding, and then my sleeping bag. And the hood of all three of those got just doused with pepper spray.
Yeah. And then it was just
So
on
it's,
them,
oh
right?
yeah, then
And
for weeks, well, like for days, I had what I called pepper nose, like because I couldn't
yeah.
not wear my rain gear. I
Right.
couldn't not
Right.
sleep in my sleeping bag. So I was
Yeah.
just like, my eyes were burning and
My
my nose were
God.
dripping. But that's the thing. I was like, okay, if day 6 was my low point, and then I sprayed
Yeah.
myself with pepper spray again, and I didn't leave because of that,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
good, man.
Hmm.
Nothing's taken me out of here
Yeah.
before day 50.
Yeah. It makes me think too, at Boulder Outdoor Survival School, they had a thing that has helped me a lot, like just in life in general, that they call compare down, which is like if you're feeling like your situation is bad, just think about how it could be worse or whatever, and then you're like, actually, it's not that bad. It could be, like I could have frostbite or whatever, like just whatever different things are happening. And I think about that a lot, even outside of a survival context, where that's just a good sort of life philosophy. If you're ever feeling like you're in a lame situation, to be like, well, it could be worse or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a thing in stoicism. That's like a practice of
mm,
stoics. Is I
mm,
forget what it's called, negative visualization or something.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but it's a technique, and it's a good one for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, because
It's
it could
funny.
always be worse.
It's not fun. I was going to say it's funny that you pepper sprayed yourself. It's not really funny. I mean, it's funny in a
Thanks.
way that you're okay, but
It
uh,
is funny actually. I mean, because like especially to have it be on the low day, and then
yeah,
like
right,
and I
exactly.
should say
Yeah.
it wasn't like fully like it didn't actually fully like hit me in the face, but it was like a cloud, and
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
all of the things that I wear
Right.
next to my
Yeah.
face.
But what was like, there was like the sort of sympathetic accident, like I'm sitting there feeling the sympathy of making a mistake like that in the dark or whatever, and I contrast that with like, because I've only ever seen the pepper spray to my memory happen twice on Alone, that I even remember that you carry it with you. And one is like, I guess maybe there was a season where a guy was like spraying at a bear with it or something, but was the guy who like sprayed his own bed because he was freaking out that the mice
That
were in it.
mice, yeah, Larry
And we
did
were
that, and I'm
like,
like, yeah,
I remember,
are you
what are you
serious?
doing? No, stop it. Just stop.
I know,
You know,
yeah.
like, why would you do that on purpose? We're like, oh my gosh, Woniya, you did it on accident. No, no, like not your bed, but like,
Right,
anyway, it was just such a funny sort of like contrast to that, where it was like, oh, right,
right,
they
yeah.
carry this with them, and you could accidentally use it, Yeah, anyway.
Well, it's interesting too, honestly, that they showed that Larry doing that because it is so against the rules to use any of your safety
Mm,
equipment
mm,
for purposes other than it's intended.
mm.
Like it's then
Makes
it becomes a
sense.
resource, it
Right.
becomes a tool, and the whole
Totally.
premise is like you don't have
Right.
extra resources, you only have
Right.
those 10 things, period. So I'm
Yeah.
like, how did
Hmm.
did he get a slap on the wrist? What happened with
Yeah.
Larry having done
Yeah.
that? But the thing is too, like, it's not like they know what you're doing while you're out there,
Hmm.
so
Right.
it's only once you come
Yeah.
in. So like, had they known in the moment that he did it, I don't know,
Mm.
it could have been a disqualification thing,
Hmm.
but it was
Interesting.
the season that they watch it and they're like, what's he doing?
I mean, I could sympathize with him in terms of being annoyed with the mice or whatever, but not I not pepper spraying my bed.
Might not have been the wisest choice. Yeah. Having done it myself, I can say it wasn't worth it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, one thing that I keep thinking about, and maybe I've mentioned this before too, is like, in the UK, Ray Mears is this famous bushcraft figure who's made like a dozen TV shows that are like educational in nature, right? Where it's just him teaching bushcraft skills, and he has like experts, and they go around the world, and there's another one where he hangs out with indigenous people, and they're like learning from them, and it's all sort of like educational documentary style stuff. And I'm just kind of like waiting for there to be like an American Ray Mears, like why hasn't this happened yet? And anyway, I'm just pitching that idea to you. Can you please be the Ray Mears? Can you please do it?
That's great to think about. I have this whole publicity tour for my book this summer, and I am actually planning to return to Neve, which is the Dene name for Great Slave Lake. And I'm hoping to have a project filming it and like actually getting to show what I think is important out there, rather than about the drama, and showing the skills and showing the beauty and the connection, and actually having the resources this time to be able to use some of the amazing natural features out there that I didn't get to, like fishing, for example, like being able to go further and get to where there's fish, or bringing an inflatable kayak or something to like get to do the things that were beyond my reach that time, bringing an axe this time. So yeah, I have been thinking about ways to bring more of that. I did it a bit through my YouTube channel, but I feel like there's other better ways to potentially do that. And I feel like I'm in a good position now. So I feel like I was always in a good position to do it, but I also definitely come off as a tree hugging hippie. And so I think that having won, and so I'm not just the first woman to win, but I now hold the record of the most cumulative days on the show at all. So that ends me an air of legitimacy where people care what I say and do more than they did a few years ago. I have the same skills. I have more skills after the alone experiences for sure. Totally. But still, like it would always have been legit, but people wouldn't necessarily have recognized it as such or known me from Adam. Because let's face it, the sexism in the survival industry is enormous, right? You have to prove yourself as a woman, and I've done that. So now I get to go out and say, and I know what I'm talking about. You can't dismiss this, So yeah, it's something I'm thinking about, and there's a limit how much of my life I want to pour into something like television or media.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's an element where you've always been a good teacher. You've always had you've dedicated your life to this. So you've always had like, as far as I've known you, you've always had like a really good set of skills. You've always been a good teacher. And it's been cool seeing you do the YouTube channel stuff because, and even just both seasons of Alone, like your comfort level in being in front of a camera, for instance, and like your knowledge base, and sort of just like, it's cool to see even over the years, like a better and better, like more polished, more succinct, more everything in like the work that you're doing. And I just really hope that that keeps growing and expanding, because I think that you're really good at it. And there's not a lot of, there's plenty of like bushcraft channels on YouTube or survival or ancestral skills, but there aren't a lot of really good ones. You know what I mean? And so it's like it's a thing where I feel like it's been a good leverage point for you to get more publicity around your skills and your particular brand and style of teaching and all of that stuff. And anyway, I just hope that it feels like you've been solidly using each sort of new platform to, elevate that and get better and better at it. And so it's just, it's been a pleasure to watch you go through this as a friend and, being inspired by what you do. So what is your, and now you've written a book, you leveraged the second time on Alone to like write about the whole thing. What exactly is your book going to be about?
Yeah, great questions. And just to speak to what you said, like that feels true to me too. When I watch my early YouTube videos, I'm like, oh, I was like, I have no personality in them. I was so uncomfortable in front of a camera originally. And so it's been interesting to me too, to see that evolution and doing the best I can. And what's my limitation right now is mostly I've been doing all of that by myself, and there's just no way to keep up with it. So now
Totally.
I'm trying to put together a team, because I agree, I think it could be amazing and so good for the world, and really land well, but I can't freaking manage a YouTube
Oh
channel
no.
and
Yeah,
do the
right.
filming and do the
Exactly.
editing, which is
Yeah,
all what I was trying to do. So
totally.
that's another thing, that having one alone
Hmm.
gives me the capacity to build a team and hire people. So I'm in the process
Yeah.
of figuring out
Awesome.
what that's going to look like, and building that team. And I've had some really great folks come forward that I'm working with now. Also, succinct, that's the part that I'm still working on. So being succinct isn't my strong suit, but I'm getting there.
Hey, we all have lots of knowledge we want to share. So
Right.
everything's interrelated. Some
Yeah.
of us can't stop talking about certain things. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. The book, I'm really excited about it. And this is not in the same ways as the Alone Journeys, but the book is in some ways like the hardest thing I've ever done. And I have learned, it's like I did a graduate course in creative writing.
Mm,
I've learned
mm,
such an
mhm,
absurd amount through the process. And it's been two really different book projects. So when I first
mm,
got out of season 6 of Alone, it felt so important to share it with the world. And that was actually part of my commitment to that wild land. I was like, in return for you feeding me, I mean, it's a big deal to take an animal's life and live from a wild place for that long. And so part of what my offering was is, I'm going to share the story. Your feeding me is going to have an impact on people all over the world if I can
mhm,
manage it,
mhm,
and show the philosophy of what it is to live in a wild place from a place of connection and interdependence,
mhm,
rather than brute strength and dominance
mhm.
and battling it, which is the images that we mostly see in our culture when we
Totally.
talk about survival.
Yeah.
So the book was a commitment, a promise, a labor of love. And when I first started doing it, I really didn't know much about writing a book. I'd written a how-to book about buckskin clothing, but a
Mhm,
compelling story I hadn't done. So I
mhm.
poured myself into writing, and I wrote everything I could remember. And after about 9 months, I had 450,000 words, which would be like a
That's a
1,200 page
lot.
novel.
Yeah.
And I was only at day 21 of my
Wow.
73-day survival experience.
Wow.
So I basically had to completely scrap that,
Mhm.
did a lot of work studying everything about storytelling,
Mhm.
and elements of the first draft are
Mhm.
certainly in the second, but
Mhm.
two very distinct phases and different
Mm.
projects in many ways. So it is a book about my first alone journey. There will be a second one. I will definitely be writing a memoir about my second time as well. But they're really different and distinct journeys. So it felt like they needed to be
Mm. Mhm.
told as two separate things. And also, there were people who thought maybe I should do the memoir about Frozen first, because that's the one I won and the timing was that.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
it felt really important to me to have them be chronological, because I felt
Mhm.
like the first one would be kind of anticlimactic
Mm.
after doing
Mm.
the second one.
Mhm.
And also, I didn't want to lose those memories, and I had a good start on it. So it's the story of Alone season 6, from the time in my life building up to receiving the invitation, and then the preparation for it, the time out, and then the recovery and integrating that experience into my life. So it's about that distinct part of time, but it's also very autobiographical in, who am I? How
Mhm.
did I come to say yes to such an adventure? And what were my motivations and the things I was struggling with in
Mhm.
going out there, and the ways that I did that. And my journey was pretty unique in that I take buckskin and wool and
Mhm.
homemade gear
Mhm.
and really put my life on the line
Mhm.
with traditional materials and my own skill. Most people buy the fanciest synthetic gear they can buy and go out there with that. But I had a real choice point between, do I trust this work and my own skills, this work that I've poured my life into, or do I recognize that that might put me at a serious disadvantage? And do I prioritize a long stay
Mhm.
and get as fancy as I possibly can? And so I really struggled with that question, and chose to go as myself or not at all,
Mhm. Yeah.
and feeling like it could have been a handicap. And I don't think it was a handicap at all. I think it was a strength. And I think that I was more comfortable and more taken care of out there than most folks who go on the show. And also, I really believe that the land recognized that commitment, and that going out using the same kind of gear that people have been using out there for thousands of years meant the land saw me differently and responded to me differently. So the book is really about those pieces and the deeper story and the heart of my journey and the commitments and the ways it changed me. And it's actually really a story of deep transformation and healing as much as it is an adventure story.
Awesome. What's your, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about writing all of, so many words, but what's your like overall writing process like?
Yeah, great question. So it's going to be different for the second memoir, but I came out and I just wrote down everything that I could remember. I had the whole journal filled with what I called snapshots, like, oh, and this thing happened, and this thing happened, and this thing happened. And remember that time when the rabbit and the lake and that storm and those northern lights, just in a mishmash. And then I went through and wrote a timeline, like here are all of the major events. So this is part of why it was so huge. Like my process was exhaustive. And then I wrote out all of the stages, like the most detailed stages of the hero's journey and all of the parts that corresponded to, from, like prophecies and otherworld helpers and the refusal of the call and then joining the call anyway, and the call to adventure, that is. And so all of those elements were in it. And then writing a pretty detailed outline and plugging all of those things into the outline of the book and then fleshing it out.
When you sit down to write, what is your, do you have a schedule? Do you, like what's the, did you ever feel like you had writer's block in terms of like how to structure things, or, like, what was that process?
That's a great question. I've certainly experienced that a fair amount in my life and with my writing, but this story was pushing to get out the whole time. So no, it was more a matter of making the space for it and just like, whoa, thus the 450,000 words, right? There was so much in there. It was so potent. And I did a lot of thinking about how to be most efficient as a writer, and recognizing that a lot of people are, fairly regimented. Like I write from, 9 to noon every day. That's how I do. I wrote this many thousand words a day and I write for this many hours, and that's how I do. And I tried doing some of that, and I recognized that that's not my process. I'm kind of an all or nothing girl. So it was like, actually, I go and I carve out a solid week, and I like work at my computer until my eyes get bleary, and then I grab something to eat. Like I'm more of a super focused person in that way. I also have been reckoning in the last year with the fact that I've had ADD my whole life, and just recognizing it, and like that's part of why I have hyper focus, and then like super spastic all over a million things and lose the focus and then dive back into hyper focus mode. So the 3 hours a day wouldn't work for me. It's just full on until it's done.
That's awesome. How long did it take you to start to finish, do you think?
So the outline and all of the parts that I was talking about, the just kind of brainstorming and hero's journey, that all happened within the first several months after I got back. And then I did a bunch of traveling. I think I taught at Echoes like the summer after I got back. And so it was fall that I started to really dig into the writing. And this is the phase 1, the huge manuscript. And so I wrote pretty solidly, like every day, most of the day, from late September through January, and got the 450,000 words in that point. And then COVID hit, and everything got turned upside down. And then I was faced with, okay, do I keep writing, or do I recognize that the world is in crisis and everybody is freaking out because they're having existential crises, recognizing that they don't have the skills to live, and I have those skills to offer. And we can't get out in person to do it anymore. So I pivoted to teaching online because I felt like that's what was asked for. And then I lost my momentum. And so then when I picked it back up, I went to a professional book coach and I was like, would you just take a look at this manuscript and let me know what you think? It's a couple hundred pages. And she looked at it and she was like, Woniya, when we say pages in the publishing industry, we're talking 12-point font, double spaced. this is like 300 pages, 10-point font, single spaced.
Right.
This is like a 1200
Yeah.
page book.
Yeah.
This is unpublishable. Like, this is utterly unpublishable. It's well written, and no one in their right mind is going to read it, and I'm not going to read it either. So
Hey, you could do volumes. No.
right.
Volume one. Yeah.
So I just kind of like left I was like, I was pretty discouraged. I was like, okay, I got to get
yeah.
back to this, but what am I going to do? And
Mm-hmm.
then it wasn't until after Frozen that I picked it back up again. And honestly, it was based on the advice of a business coach who's like, look,
Mm.
like, your other ideas of what to do with this exposure are great, but I think frankly, you should drop everything and finish that book. And I
Yeah.
said, boy, you're right. And I
Yeah.
made a promise to that land to get that story out, and I'm not doing it.
Mm. Mm.
So I picked it back up again June of last year, and by late fall had my first draft, and then editing the drafts probably January through late February. Well, I had a finished draft, but it's hard to like define it because
Mm-hmm.
I did so many read throughs and big edit
Sure.
jobs. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was mid-March by the time I was basically done, and it was just a matter of copy editing and smaller decisions and nitpicky
Mm-hmm.
details.
Awesome.
So two phases of just like all out,
Mm-hmm.
nothing but this,
Mm-hmm.
working late into the night,
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
go, go, go.
Yeah. That's awesome. When you pivoted to teaching online, we had to do some of that at Rewild Portland, and we were kind of scrambling and experimented with a couple of different ways of doing it. Yeah, what was that like?
It was wild. It
Mhm.
was, I mean, talk about out of the frying pan into the fire. Most people are like, oh yeah, the slow time of COVID. I'm like, are you kidding me? I've never
Mhm.
worked so hard. It was crazy. So it was wild, and it was quite an evolution. I did three, I think we froze for a second.
Mhm.
So I did three online gatherings, and then started doing smaller courses too. And I really changed the technology of how I was doing them every time. I learned a tremendous amount, all things that I never had any intention of learning, all the different online platforms and video editing and marketing
Mhm.
and all of
Mhm.
these things. So it was really intense and pretty difficult for a person like me who the last thing they want to do is spend a lot of time inside in front of a computer. And so that's where I'm trying to do it in a more balanced way now, and recognizing that unless I have a team supporting me with a lot of those other aspects, so I
Mhm.
can keep living the life that keeps me inspired
Mhm.
and is actually based on the skills I'm trying to
Yeah.
share, it doesn't make sense for me to do it online. That said, I'm in the process of doing that. I want to do that. And I didn't expect to love teaching online as much as
Mhm.
I have, because
Mhm.
the way I have it, when people go to a class, it's usually like, here, learn this skill and then go back to your life, or here, go to this gathering for a week where there's just a splatter of all of these different classes and then go back to your life. But the way I did mine, I was curating. First, we're going to learn this skill, and then we're going to
Mhm.
learn this skill, and we're going to do it over the course of weeks. So you
Mhm.
are integrating it, and they're all building on one another. And we had regular check-ins, so I actually got to see and support how people were integrating
Mhm.
into their lives, and I think that it affected people far more deeply than any of my in-person teaching ever
Mhm.
has.
Mhm.
And that's so inspiring and motivating for me.
Mhm.
I mean, I have lots of people who I'm still in touch with regularly, and many of them have become my Patreon members, so we
Mhm.
check in regularly, who their lives have been utterly changed, and I'm engaged with their lives and I see the change. And that's what I live for. It's really important for me to be making a positive difference in the world and to be able to see the positive change. It's been amazing. So,
Yeah.
the gatherings, I rarely keep in touch with those people, but the online I do, because that's what
Yeah.
it's built for. I built
Yeah.
an online community platform that people remain in and
Mhm.
keep interacting about.
Mhm. Yeah, it's been really interesting to see sort of the longer term effects, as well as like, um, I didn't expect to do anything online ever. And then my 101 class, it's 4 sessions. We were in the middle of one, and it got, the lockdowns happened after 2 sessions, right? And so I was like, they're like, "Are we going to do it online, or how are we going to finish this?" And I was like, "Oh, well, we'll just wait a couple of weeks and see if these lockdowns go away." And it was
Right.
like months go by, and people are like, "Hey, can we just do this on Zoom?" And I was like, "Okay, fine." And I did the last two sessions on Zoom, and then I was like, "Oh, I totally see how this can work. And then, people who had been asking me for years, like, can you do this 101 class online? And me being like, no, I'm never going to do it online. It's all about being in person. Um, Finally, they were all stoked because I started offering it online. I've had people from like the Czech Republic, people from Germany, Australia, just everywhere, where some people can speak English at least, because the class is in English. And it's been really cool to see that making something that was super localized accessible to people on a global scale has, I think, influenced a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah, the same. I mean, I've had people from all over the world. My last buckskin sewing course, we had a woman from the Netherlands who was getting up at 3 a.m. to join our Zoom calls.
Oh my God,
I've had people, all over Europe, a lot in Australia and New Zealand. Some, like, I had some folks in the Bahamas. I mean, making the skills accessible to more people has always been a goal of mine. But when I wasn't willing to embrace the technology, I was really handicapped in my ability to do that. And then also with my courses, I offer them for free to Indigenous peoples. They just need to fill out my application form. I offer scholarships to non-gender binary folks. I mean, I'm trying, like, I believe these skills are a birthright and I want to get them to people. And how do you do that in person if you don't know those folks?
Totally.
So it's allowed me to actually live into my missions. My business is called Buckskin Revolution. And like, I actually mean that. I think that centering these skills is revolutionary and transformative. And I don't want to just be serving the people who are already in the loop and know about the in-person things and can afford to get to them and pay for them. So I feel like for those of us who are willing to put ourselves out there and do the uncomfortable things we don't like to do, it actually allows us to be 100 times more effective than we were without that.
Yeah, agreed. And it's just funny, like the people who give you shit about, oh, you're doing ancestral skills, you're online. It's always so funny to me. So I'm like, maybe you don't really get the point if you think that we can't use modern technology to teach ancestral technology. If it's more effective to do it that way, then
right. And like, how entitled is that to be like, oh, you're not being pure enough. I'm being pure, but also, I get to have it, and other people who don't have the means don't get to have it. Like, that's not what it's about.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, do you have any other thoughts or questions or anything on your mind?
Well, I do want to share a very exciting milestone thing, which is my first proofs, my first hard copies of the book arrive Friday in the mail. So it's super exciting. I'm getting really close to being able to have it up for pre-order. So that's kind of one of the first steps. I'm in, the final proofreading and getting it all set. So it's going to be available for pre-order shortly, and it'll be popping up on Amazon, and also my website and Barnes and Noble Nook, and a lot of the different outlets it'll be available through. So folks can find that out on my website. And I have actually 2 websites now, my Buckskin Revolution one, and then also WoniyaThibeault.com. Awesome. Pretty easy to find me by Googling me. But I wanted to show I have this binder, which is the whole manuscript.
Cool. Awesome.
I'll print it out. And I worked closely with an artist in putting it together. And so one of the things I'm super excited about is the maps of my site, so that people can actually see and experience it as I did. So
that's awesome.
Like, kind of, yeah. So we were kind of going for like a hand-drawn Middle Earth type map look.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But the whole idea of the book is to have it really be a visceral experience. It's written first person, present tense. So you're experiencing it with me. You really get to immerse yourself in being there. And so the maps, and there's also photos, are really to give people that felt sense of what it's like. So yeah, we're getting really, really close, and I'm super thrilled about it.
And it should be available for order when this podcast airs, because we're recording this, it's April, but this will be posted in June. So you can just, you could probably, if you're listening to this right now, you can probably just go get the book.
Absolutely. Yes. So it comes out June 13th, and it's available. It'll be available for pre-order by the beginning of May. So yes, it is absolutely available for pre-order, and going to be hopefully in bookstores near you and all over the internet by the time you're listening to this.
Are you planning a book tour?
I am. We're still throwing together dates. One thing I'm really excited about is I just committed to being in Yellowknife, which is in the Northwest Territories, and where we first kind of launched out into the wilderness from for their summer solstice festival. So
Oh,
it's kind
cool.
of full circle returning to the place that I wrote
That's
this at
awesome.
the height of the light, kind of the opposite time of year that I was there, and actually being in relationship with that place for the launch of the book and bringing it to those people first. I'm also donating a portion of the sales proceeds to the native peoples who are of that place, which is the Selke Dene. So just really looking forward to how this book will keep those relationships flourishing and get to give back to that place and those people.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's always a pleasure to chat.
Indeed.
And to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the show again. I'm looking forward to reading your book and seeing what you do
Thanks
next.
for having me. And just a plug for my Patreon team. My Patreon members always get first access to things like my writings, things like my interviews, more in the loop about everything that I'm up to. They've been seeing drafts of the book and the cover and the maps and the art as it's been evolving. So that's a huge part of helping me do the work that I do. And also you get live calls with me, you get in the loop, you get access to a lot of the things that I do that the public doesn't get. So look me up if you're interested in joining that. Woniya Thibeault, patreon.com will get you there searching that.
Sweet. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Really sweet talking.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rewilding podcast. Check out the show notes to connect with my guest and for a list of resources that we mentioned in our conversation. If this episode inspired you, made you think more deeply, or gave you some new tools to use, make sure to subscribe and become a patron at patreon.com/PeterMichaelBauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Thanks for listening.